From Poverty to Possibilities is important because it harnesses the collective power of cross-sector and cross-system collaboration. It looks at our community through a strength-based lens and what's possible rather than what is wrong.
This summit brings together so many organizations, professionals, leaders in our community that really collaborate on great ideas and think of ways how we can work together in ways where we never have before.
We realize we can't do it alone. And so having an opportunity to bring more partners to the table is tremendous in terms of the support in the community.
I think it's powerful, the work that the United Way is bringing folks together to do. These conversations happen a lot in community.
And it really gives us an opportunity to look at the whole system and focus our energy on how to address those issues.
4 years ago, we adopted the goal of lifting 15,000 families out of poverty by the year 2028.
Before COVID, we were making a lot of headway in talking about home ownership and increasing assets, lifting people out of poverty. And the communities most impacted by COVID tend to be the lower wage working families, and they lost their jobs.
One thing that this pandemic has shown us, things happening in our society really force us to face the ugly truth about the world in which we live, but not in a way where, again, there's nothing that we can do about it. We can disrupt. I love the concept of disruption. Sometimes when you look at issues of race and equity, they seem very overwhelming. Like I can't impact these systems that are in play.
What we've learned is that by being in relationship with Alice families, we've helped them survive, but the critical component moving forward is that we continue that relationship so we can help them thrive and succeed once we're past everything.
We have to take a look at where do we start again and how do we continue to empower people and help people understand that these are still really important. There is going to be an end to this pandemic. There is going to be jobs out there again. So how do we stabilize right now and really push the importance of that growth in the future?
It's also really, really important that we stress the value of resiliency, because this has been a hard time for us. And the fact that we're still sustaining the work, people are still moving forward, it's important that we recognize and we lift that up.
When I think about building community resilience, it's about putting services and systems in place that we can not only bounce back when we're faced with adversity, but we can bounce forward because we have those systems and supports. If inequity is a driver of adversity and poor outcomes, then we can't do this work without putting equity at the center, and we got to get to the roots.
History shows that when people commit to change and working together, that we can overcome anything.
Collaboration is how we're going to do this. Collaboration is where we're going to take action. Collaboration is where we stand together, united on a common goal.
And I believe if we're successful today and beyond today, we'll continue to turn hope and ideas into action.
Together, we're making more possible.
We're disrupting poverty.
And ultimately, making a more resilient community.
Good morning. I'm Steve Harlow, Vice Chair of the United Way Pierce County Board of Directors, and I want to welcome everybody to our fourth Community Poverty Summit, From Poverty to Possibilities. First, please join me as we honor and acknowledge the land where many of us reside or streaming from today has long served as the site of the meeting and exchange amongst many indigenous peoples, specifically the Puyallup tribe of Indians. We pay our respect to their elders, both past and present. United Way honors and respects the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which so many of us gather. We are so grateful to kick off our annual Poverty Summit today, and while we wish we could be together in person, we're thrilled that we're here virtually. This event is made possible because we have committed partners in our community who believe in our work and lend their support through event sponsorships. I will name all of our sponsors, so please hold your fingers snapping and hand waving until the end. Tacoma Public Utilities, State Farm Insurance, Columbia Bank, the Boeing Company, CHI Franciscan, Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, Harborstone Credit Union, Tacoma Community College, and WSECU. Thanks for all of your support. I would like now to recognize our board of directors, some of whom are here today, and of course, the tremendous staff at the United Way of Pierce County who've been working tirelessly to pull all of this together. Lastly, I would like to thank our elected officials who joined us here today. And finally, I'd like to welcome our speakers box, United Way of Pierce County's President, CEO, Donna Poinapento.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. This is really, really exciting. We have over 360 people that have registered for this event. I certainly am thrilled to see all of you, and I wish we could be together in person. You know, 2020 has been quite a year that just none of us could have imagined. This pandemic has exposed, every weakness in our society. It has exacerbated system inequities that support vulnerable populations. And on top of that, the racial injustices and killings of innocent Black men and women in our communities has added just another layer to the work that we are all doing to help struggling families. And those struggling families, those Ellis families, and if we were in the big room together, I would basically ask you to raise your hand if you've heard of Ellis. And Ellis is asset limited, income constrained employed. And we know that people of color are disproportionately impacted as well. With Ellis in our county, 31% are Ellis families. Of that population, 46% are Black and 44% are Hispanic. So there's an urgency to the work. There's an urgency to this work that we're on together. This summit provides a space for us to listen, to talk, to learn from one another about the ways to disrupt poverty through advocacy, policy change, and collaboration to build a more equitable and resilient community. Galvanizing the community around social, human, and economic impact of poverty in Pierce County, United Way has committed to a bold goal of lifting 15,000 households out of poverty by 2028. And we're doing that one family at a time. But you know what? We can't do it alone. No one can. Solving for poverty is complex, and we must collaborate to achieve significant and lasting social change. No single policy, government department, organization, or program can tackle this and solve this complex problem. Tackling poverty is one worth fighting for when you consider that 1 in 3 families are struggling to make ends meet in Pierce County. We know that we must disrupt poverty now, because individuals and families continue to suffer, and we will bring yet another generation of poverty into the community. This is a tremendous loss of potential individually and to our society, and our economy is just not sustainable. Since we began the Poverty Summit, there are some key themes that we've uncovered throughout the last 3 years, about systems change and focusing on policy and advocacy, looking at how we can better partner together. How do we leverage resources? And most importantly, how we look at the issues of race, equity, and justice. Last year, we focused on affordable housing and using a human-centered design approach, developed innovative strategies and solutions to this growing need. Today, we're going to dig deeper, disrupting poverty by exploring the intersections of trauma, equity, and resilience in a world of 2 pandemics, is what I call it, COVID-19 and racial inequities. So get ready to roll up your sleeves, sharpen your focus, and develop a plan to work on these critical issues in our community. So last year, we challenged the community to develop approaches to address barriers to poverty at our first Pitch to Ditch poverty contest. This contest recognizes that groups and individuals impacted by our community's challenges also have the knowledge and lived experiences that best equip them to visualize and implement community-based solutions to those challenges. The Pitch to Ditch Challenge provides funding and support and recognition to individuals and community-led groups with big ideas and projects that address the racial and social justices that disproportionately impact our disproportionately impact individuals in poverty. At last summit, we awarded 3 groups. We had 3 winners. They got $5,000 each. This year, we wanted the contest to lift up and highlight those big ideas that help mitigate the racial and social inequities that are so evident, and those ideas that address the impact of COVID-19, the COVID-19 crisis in our community. Our judges this year were from Annette Bryan, Puyallup Tribal Council, and Annette is also on our board. Brian Humphreys, City of Lakewood, Eli Taylor, Key Bank is also on our board. Joe Martinez, who is also on our board. Mark Merrill, who's with Shared Housing. Mark Menangello, who's with Harborstone, and Sabrina Chambers, who's with the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department, and she is also on our board. So thanks to those judges, and we have 3 finalists. So we're gonna watch a video from each group, and then later in the program, we're gonna ask you to vote for the group that you believe should receive 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place awards. So hopefully you will stick around for the morning. The name of our first project is DQ Evans 253 Camp. Since the COVID-19 crisis has started, sports activities for children and real social interactions have been interrupted, while drug and alcohol use increasing due to pandemic-related anxiety and depression. This big idea addresses this issue by providing a safe space for kids to stay active and doing fun sporting events. Their goal is to provide mentors for troubled and low-income youth by providing an atmosphere that can give them relief from the real-life struggles they experience. So here we are ready to show the first video, DQ Evans 253 Camp.
Hello everybody, my name is DeQuinn Evans. I'm 33 years old, I'm from Compton, California. I grew up in heavily gang affiliated projects, and I made a lot of hasty decisions growing up. I was incarcerated 5 times from the age 12 to 18. My last incarceration was when I was 16 years old. I got sentenced to a year in a place called Camp Kilpatrick. This is where they shot the movie The Gridiron Gang. And this camp gave me an opportunity to play football. I had so much anger, aggression, and pain built up in me that this was a positive environment for me to let all that out.
Playing football right now, my goal is to get off probation, play football for a junior college, hopefully get a scholarship to a 4-year university.
In there, they had a mentorship program that I could attend once a week, every Friday, by a man named Gene Massey. And this is where I learned about developing a vision, life skills, self-esteem, goal setting. But the most critical aspect of this mentorship program was the relationship that I built with Gene. Without a doubt, I knew every Friday I could count on him. Studies show the #1 thing young people need is a consistent and positive relationship with an adult, and that's what Gene blessed me with. And this is what I want to do. Our sports camp helps students develop grit and resilience and access to mentorship. And through mentorship, we give them tools to navigate their life, whether that be at school, at home, or in their community. And one of the biggest issues our youth is facing is fatherlessness. And we want to give these students an opportunity to engage with men that look like them and have shared experiences. Our goal is to sponsor 50 at-risk youth. Your partnership will help us provide our young people with athletic gear, snacks, transportation, backpacks, non-perishables, and PPEs. We want our youth to feel a part of something special. All for one thing, to let them know that they love and nobody's forgot about them.
Hello, my name is Sierra Nobles, and I'd like to welcome you to Reflections, Paint and Create. Please come on in. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I've overcame homelessness, and I am the voice of the voiceless. Art became my healing. art became my way of expressing my feelings. The way art has changed my life is so amazing. So I started my own business and I named it Reflections, Paint and Create. I truly believe that your art is your reflection and your art is your self-awareness. Extra funding would give us the opportunity to heal so many people in our community and create smiles and so much laughter. This is only the beginning though, and I'm so excited for our children's future. It is time to stand up for what is righteously ours, and that, my friend, is peace and love. My name is Sierra Nobles, and I'm a survivor of my own faith.
My team has already experienced taking the necessary precautions to keep everyone safe during COVID. Our social distancing, sanitizing, and keeping our pods of kids at 5 max.
Wonderful, our first Pitch to Ditch video. Because we were fortunate to have so many brilliant thought leaders and subject matter experts with us today, I will turn the speaker square over to Dr. Ali Modarres. Ali is Dean of Urban Studies and the Assistant Chancellor for the Community Engagement at the University of Washington, Tacoma. We all enjoy hearing from Ali because he breaks down economic development through an equity lens and has a fantastic way of making numbers more compelling than anyone I've ever heard. And I love data and I love numbers. And Ali has also been a great friend to United Way, being on the research team for the Ellis project that we have been a part of over the last 4 years. So Ali, I turn it over to you.
Good morning, Donna. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, working on a topic that's really important for all of us and for our communities. I am going to actually walk you through a series of slides because you know my talks would not work without slides. So here we go with that. I'm going to share my screen so hopefully everyone can see it. It is important for us to realize that COVID-19 has meant an acceleration in our inequities. From that standpoint, I'd like to walk us through a series of points that allows us to witness what is going on with the region. I think are my slides still showing?
They are, I can see them, Ali.
Okay. So we have had an uneven development in our region. I have spoken about that for multiple times in various conversations. We have a region in which there's an uneven distribution of jobs, specifically jobs in terms of how income is generated. We have segregations by income, race, ethnicity, and age throughout the region. There are regional income and wealth differentials that we have to pay attention to. And this uneven development historically has meant an uneven impact on BIPOC community. And essentially that means that before COVID, we were at the point where we could actually see these challenges in our region. I don't need to introduce this region to you. You can understand that when I look at the entirety of the King County itself, even there is this high pocket of high income population and along the I-5 corridor into Pierce County where the communities of color are. Systematically, there's low income challenges in these neighborhoods. We also have jobs that are primarily away from us. These are jobs for which many of us have to commute. As I've said multiple times, these are the red regions. These are some of the areas that produce majority of the workers for the regions where the jobs are. So our region has been built around what can solidly be called uneven development. That has meant doesn't matter what city you live in Pierce County, you are commuting to those. But the picture gets a little bit more dire when we begin to think about how these things work and reflect on poverty. Since 1960s, the United States has gone through its cycles of poverty decline and increases. By 2010, actually nationally, we were at 14.9% poverty. In terms of state of Washington, that was 12.9, but in terms of Pierce County, it was at 11.9. Gradually over the course of the decade that we just finished, and we are finishing still working on it, is that we have had this impact that's really important. And that is that by 2019, even though the national poverty was at 10.5%, the division of who is impacted by this poverty is really important. Poverty seems to impact people of color, Black and Indigenous and people of color, communities of people of color, much higher. Non-Hispanic white poverty was at 7.3, but notice that nationally poverty among Black population stood at 18.8, for Asian and Asian Americans at 7.3, and for Latinx at 15.7. I want to make sure that we all understand that the Asian community itself is divided into different components, and not everyone benefits from the 7.3%. We also have much higher poverty among women. We also have much higher poverty among people with disabilities. So nationally, we have that division that has impacted us historically, even before we reached COVID. In 2018, the last year for which we have data for poverty in our county, 8.3% of our population were in poverty, but notice that again, among those who were classified at poverty line or below, the share of women is higher than men, the share of divorced population is higher than others. And here's the interesting part. 38.3% were single or never married. And the reason for that is because poverty in our region impacts children significantly. Nearly a quarter of all children under the age of 15 were in poverty as of 2018. And that translated also into racial and ethnic communities in terms of a higher impact. What becomes interesting is this notion of, so what did actually this mean to our region? It means that COVID-19 has created an excitement about the future on the one hand, future of work on the one hand, but also we need to pay attention to the fact that COVID-19 has amplified our inequities and will continue to do so if we don't pay attention and focus on racial and social justice issues. For example, the excitement is that the most recent research suggests that 37% of all jobs in the United States can actually be performed from home. Unfortunately, that means that these jobs are, unfortunately, depending on your perspective, these jobs are typically paying more. They're the ones that pay more than other jobs, and they cannot be, and they can be done at home. But for those who don't get paid a lot, for them, working at home is not a possibility. So service jobs are the ones that are not going to benefit from this future of work. This means also that BIPOC communities are more likely to suffer from the health and economic impact of COVID-19. Let me unpack this a little bit for you, because across all metro regions, these are the sort of jobs that we are looking at. College educated, high median household income areas are benefiting from that. In Pierce County, where we have relatively low median household income and lower than average rate of college graduates, and a much higher presence of service and retail sectors, we need to be very careful, and we need to be paying attention very specifically to the issue of who works and in what jobs. Now, here is the beginning of an example. If you translate the national research into our region, 39% of all jobs in King County can be done from home, but notice that when we come to Pierce County and City of Tacoma, specifically, that rate falls to 30%. Let me unpack it a little bit more for you. From the first week of January 2020 to the first week of August, 206,000 or 207,000 people in Pierce County filed for unemployment insurance. This is the first time the first unemployment claims from ESD. 3 of the top industries for that were food services and drinking places, 17,954 filed for that unemployment. These are jobs that for which average hourly earning of workers in this industry ranges from $13.71 to $15.26, translating to an annual income of $25K to $30K. For those of you who know even the housing prices, how that they are, that is an inadequate amount of income. For administrative and support services, $8,500. For educational services, $8,000. What we are looking at is that our region has been impacted severely in terms of what COVID-19 has done, has created already for us. Those in poverty and working poor are going to be in a specific situation where They are going to be impacted the most, and the working poor and the Alice family members have already experienced these negative economic impacts of COVID-19. Housing and food insecurity has grown and will continue to do so until we either learn how to live with this virus, and hopefully not for too long, and find ways to treat the illness. Because until then, our service workers don't have the option of working at home. And if they're losing their jobs, the replacement jobs are not there. So health impact and mental health consequences are quite important. Historical patterns of racial injustice have been aggravated under COVID-19, and therefore we need to pay attention to what that really means to BIPOC communities and what that means to their economic condition. So what to do? Poverty reduction programs and family support systems need to be scaled up beyond what we would have imagined last December. Our region needs to address wage gaps and income insecurity in a serious and aggressive manner. We need to consider the fact that many of our service sector workers in one of our largest economic sectors do not earn enough to sustain an equitable and reasonable quality of life, and COVID-19 has made that clear to us. We need to remember that the engines that produced our social and racial inequities are still in place. They have just been aggravated in the COVID-19 era. That means that our interventions and course corrections need to be scaled up as well in order to make poverty to possibilities a reality. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the great work that you do. Thank you, United Way, for all the great work in our communities and for inviting me this morning to share my thoughts with you.
Thank you so very much, Ali. That's it's always important to hear from you in terms of, just so that we are really clear on the impact and the things that we need to do as a community to get through this together. So appreciate you being here with us this morning. So I now have the incredible job where I get to meet and work with people across the region, across the country. And this year I have had the pleasure of getting to know and working with our keynote speaker, Dr. Wendy Ellis. And Dr. Wendy Ellis is the director of the Center for Community Resilience and the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. The Building Community Resilience Collaborative and Networks are implementing the BCR Collaborative are implementing the BCR process, sorry about that, a strategic approach for cross-sector partners to align resources, programs, and initiatives with community-based efforts to address adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments, or what's called the pair of ACEs. This strengths-based approach is aimed at building the infrastructure to promote resilience in vulnerable communities by improving the access to supports and buffers that help individuals bounce back and communities thrive. The BCR process is being tested in 6 regions, including 4 counties in Washington. And United Way is leading the effort called Resilient Pierce County, along with DSHS in Pierce County. In 2019, Dr. Ellis launched the Resilience Catalyst in Public Health using a novel framework that leverages local health departments, including the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. Dr. Ellis has spent the last decade developing and working to grow a resilience movement to address systemic inequities that contribute to social and health disparities, often transmitted in families from generation to generation. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming Dr. Wendy Ellis.
Well, thank you, Donna, for that introduction. It really is exciting for me to be able to join you all today in this very important meeting around moving from poverty to possibilities. I don't speak to you from the other Washington with limited understanding of the Tacoma Pierce County region. I actually spent 17 years living up there. And my children were born there, and my master's was earned at University of Washington. So it is somewhat of a homecoming for me, and it certainly is an honor to bring this work that we do across this country here to Tacoma and to Pierce County, and deepening the work, not just with DSHS, but also with your local health department. So let's dive in. Let's begin to talk a little bit about the work and really the challenge for us moving forward in building community resilience. What does that mean? So just to give you a little background on the work that we do at the Center for Community Resilience, we have 4 ways that we attack this work, really getting to the heart of inequity so that we can understand what are those policy barriers, what are those programs and practices that drive trauma, so that we can remove and dismantle those apparatus in order to get to community resilience. Now, here in Tacoma, you have been a part of the National Building Community Resilience Collaborative and Networks for a little over a year, where we work across sectors, multidisciplinary, multiracial collaborations that really get to the heart of inequity. That work has really fostered a whole new line of tools and resources that we've developed based on community experiences and holding conversations to help foster equity. And I'll show you some of that in today's presentation. The Public Health 3.0 work is work that we've been blessed to be able to work with the Centers for Disease Control and local health departments across the country as we begin to look at the systemic racism as a public health crisis, as that is the resilience catalyst in public health work. And then all of this work we do in real time, to translate the lessons learned, the best evidence that we're getting from the field into policy, both big P policy as well as small p. And that's a very important piece of this, because we can, without the policy change, we will not truly dismantle the apparatus that drives inequity across our country. This is the network. I'm proud again to be able to expand our work in Washington State, not just to the 4 counties, but also to the local health department. But thinking about what you do in Washington State is part of a larger network, a larger understanding of what equity looks like in community, who are those partners that can come to the table and help us dismantle the apparatus of white supremacy. And so as you'll see from this map, it's not just private industry, it's also state level offices such as the Washington Department of Social and Health Services. But in Dallas, Texas, we have city manager's office. In Washington, D.C., we have the office of the mayor, the office of urban resilience. Those drivers and levers of adversity in community. So when we talk about building community resilience, what is that? What does that look like? And what is the process of doing this? So this is the process, and we'll spend this time that I'm talking to you really around building a shared understanding, both of what is the vision of resilience, but also who should be at the table and what are the different roles that we all play in creating and dismantling this process that perpetuates poverty in our communities. So when we talk about adversity, do we have a clear understanding of the experience of adversity from the narrative of the community? When we understand that narrative of the community, not just our data, but understanding the lived experience of adversity and trauma and inequity, then we begin to understand, are we really resourced in a way to address this? Do we have equitable access to the resources and supports that our community needs? That's assessing our state of readiness. And when we go through this process of assessing our state of readiness, then we can begin to understand who else needs to be at the table. What are the other resources? Who are the other partners that should be at the table? Joined with community voice throughout this process to address inequity that is at the heart of adversity. So as you see that bug there on the right-hand side that has the connection, that connotes the connection between trauma, equity, and resilience, you begin to understand that we can't get to resilience if we do not address and foster equity. Why is that? Because we recognize that inequity drives trauma in our communities. So how do we frame this in a way that people such as yourself may not necessarily understand nor see themselves in this work? So I took this simple vision of a tree that most of us can recognize, a tree, the branches, the leaves, and to use this as a metaphor of adversity in community and how it's experienced, but also what drives, perhaps what feeds the adversity that we see. So using the framing of adverse childhood experiences such as maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, divorce, mental illness, parental incarceration, homelessness, physical and emotional neglect, using the metaphor of the branches and the leaves, any of us walking through a park would assess the health, perhaps, of a tree. Are the branches strong? Should I let my child climb up that tree? Will it hold them? Are the leaves green? Yes, we would assess perhaps that that tree is healthy, but would we understand fully what is nurturing the strength of that tree? Do we understand the nutrients that are in the soil that are feeding that outcome? So when you apply this pair of aces tree to what we see in community, perhaps if you're an educator and you have a child who can't sit still in his chair, who seems to be agitated, or a young girl who seems to be withdrawn and not connecting to her peers, or nor really connecting to the information and the lessons that are being presented, perhaps we might begin to jump to an assumption about ADHD, or perhaps this child is suffering from some form of depression. And those observations could be correct, but what's driving the outcome that we see in that classroom? Is it that the little girl is withdrawn because she's worried about her mom who's working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head because her father has been incarcerated? Or is the young man that is agitated and not necessarily able to sit and focus on his schoolwork is because there's been yet another shooting in his class, in his neighborhood, and he's walking past on his way to the classroom a growing memorial to yet another young life taken in the neighborhood? Perhaps he's worried about his own safety. Perhaps he's worried about his own future. Perhaps the little girl is worried too about her own future. So this is a way for us to begin to go beyond just treating and thinking about the outcomes, but really dig deep in the soil and begin to understand what's driving what we see on those leaves and those branches. Is it homelessness? Is it community violence? Is it a lack of access to economic mobility? Is it the lack of access to poor housing or quality or affordable housing in itself? There are many questions that we should ask. There are many ways that we should examine that soil, because adversity is not just an outcome. It is often intentionally by design from our policies. And we've certainly seen that in 2020 as we've begun to address this pandemic within a pandemic. Not just looking at adversity from a childhood or an individual perspective, but adversity that is being experienced at the community level in record numbers. Understanding that we've seen an increase in substance abuse and domestic violence, that just maintaining our children's ability to learn has been stretched to the ultimate challenge, whether that's because of lack of access to technology, or parents who are either, if they're blessed enough to be able to work from home, are also now taking on the burden of teaching their children. But far too often in our Ellis families, we know that those parents, if they are employed, are likely working outside the home, and children are having to teach themselves. Children are falling behind. Our learning gaps, particularly for our Ellis families, are growing wider and wider as this pandemic continues. And what's driving that? It's not just the virus. eventually we will have a vaccine for this virus. No, what's driving these outcomes that we see in these huge amounts are the same elements in the soil that have been there all along. The inequities have cratered in such a way. Anything happening yet? No, hers is. While we are waiting, sorry for the technical difficulties, you know, there's always going to be something that's going to happen. You can't plan for this. So what we're going to do is, while we try to get Wendy back on, because I know that we were hanging on every word and we're working with her to get her back on, we're going to show the second pitch to ditch video. So the second pitch to ditch video is the G Street Collaborative. And the G Street, due to COVID-19, capacity at shelters has decreased to maintain social distancing protocol. The street right behind the shelter, G Street, has long been a gathering place for folks without shelter. For this community, the apparent issues are limited access to steady, reliable running water source and the lack of resources to appropriately dispose of waste. Oh, let's see, Wendy, I think, is coming back, so we might have her. Let's give it a second. And if she isn't, then we will go to the video. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Wendy. Yes. So
Yes, this has been a true example of resilience. I am so sorry.
No worries.
I'm not sure what happened, but actually it looks like Zoom kicked me out. So give me a moment here to refresh, and we should be able to get back on track. So as I was saying and alluding to, is that many of the inequities that we see right now are not just an effect of the pandemic. Rather, they are part and parcel of what has existed in our soil all along. And that is the part that is, I think, most difficult for most of us to, hold on, let me get back to where I was. So I hope this doesn't give anyone motion sickness. So as I was saying is that, you know, for us, it is not, there's a dual challenge here. We have to be able to understand the sources of inequity, and that connection between trauma and resilience. But we also have to be concrete. We have to not just speak about past policy, but we have to be able to frame it in what are the effects today and what are the measurable, not only the measurable impacts, but actually the measurable outcomes that are produced by policies that are these community characteristics. And so understanding that and being able to effectively make that connection to policymakers is really our challenge here. And so as we have dove into this work across the country, and certainly we'll be doing a much deeper dive with the local health department, is really helping to frame this white supremacy, this structural racism, to understand that we're not just talking about interpersonal reactions and relations here, that we are talking about a system of policies that have become durable in producing the outcomes that we see. So when Ali was earlier talking about the disproportionalities in communities of color and also by gender, we have to recognize that those things, there's a pattern there. It's a systemic pattern that is produced by what was a belief in white supremacy that then became empowered by these systems and policies that became structural racism to do what? To produce just as what Ali presented in the data, to produce white supremacy as the outcome, whether it is a domination in power, health, wealth, or well-being. And when we use that framing, then it also allows us to be a little bit distanced from creating an interpersonal confrontation. And it's really getting at the heart of structural racism. And so that is where we look at our work and really formulate our work based on the history of policy and just demonstrating, using the data, much like Ali's data, to demonstrate the effectiveness of specific policies that drive these outcomes. So this is one of the policy timelines that we look at in our work and help people to understand the intentionality that we didn't just get here today because we had a pandemic in 2020. No, we got here because the intentionality of all of our actions, not just from 1619, but actually going all the way back to 1492, to the oppression and darn near genocide of Native Americans in this country, which served as a blueprint for oppression and subjugation for economic interest of Africans when they arrived in 1619. Then you had Jim Crow laws and Black Code laws that were actually codified to a certain extent in our New Deal housing policies that then created this difference and generate the ability to have generational wealth between families, because who had access to housing, which is the #1 way of passing on wealth in this country from generation to generation. So when we look at our Ellis families and when we look at the disproportionality in poverty in communities of color and by education, it's not just merely because of personal behaviors and personal choices. It's absolutely driven by policy and design. We can see these numbers in Washington State then, in Pierce County, and how this translates not only to what's happening with families, but also at the community level. The disproportionality of the experience of adverse childhood experiences, but also that these experiences happen to, they oftentimes accumulate and happen more often in one home than another. More often in one community versus another. So you have multiple adversities that pile up in a home. And it's not just those 10 ACEs. It is also food insecurity. It is also not being able to have a parent to read to you at night because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. It's also not having a parent there to help you tie your shoes or teach you to tie your shoes because one of your parents is incarcerated. And the disproportionality of how that happens to not only children of color, but children of lower income. These adversities build upon themselves and are absolutely by design. So what do? We take an intentionality in how we dismantle and reconstruct. Our team at the Center for Community Resilience prepared a gap and opportunity analysis for 2 Pierce County communities, looking at Franklin Pierce, East Tacoma, and Salishan, and really getting to the heart and understanding of what are the inequities that are experienced in your community, whether it's income inequality, access to mental health supports, housing instability, and food insecurity. One of the key indices that we've looked at is this family labor force and participation in income. That about 60 to 70% of households that have parents in the labor force, that the median income, family income in Western Franklin Pierce and East Tacoma Salishan communities is lower than the Pierce County average, lower than the Pierce County average. So that's $50K to $72K in the areas that we've looked at versus $80,000. We know what a huge difference, what that will make for a family, whether that means that you have a higher proportion of your income that's being spent to support housing, or you have lesser income to support a family vacation, or your child going to camp, or your child getting remedial help, perhaps from a tutor or from some other support specialist. These things add up. It's not just about generational wealth. It's also just about your access to the supports and buffers to help your family not only bounce back from adversity, but to bounce forward and thrive. And so this is why we look at community resilience, not just through what are the support services that a family can access, but what are the supports and buffers that are available to communities writ large. So when we talk about the cross-sector partners that should be at the table, we're not just talking about social services, and we're not just talking about health services. We're talking about the infrastructure of a community, housing, the public school infrastructure, the criminal justice and law enforcement sectors. They all have to be at the table because we know that they all drive outcomes that very much inform not only the community environment, but the very outcomes at the individual level. And we know that perhaps take law enforcement, that the practices of law enforcement vary differentially based upon the housing stock of a community, based upon the income of a community, based upon the racial makeup of a community. And what does that do? That changes educational attainment, that changes incarceration rates, contact rates. And so it creates this vicious cycle. All of these sectors are connected. And so it's not enough to just change policy in one sector or practice in one sector. We have to look at how these things work synergistically together. So when we do that, when we bring those parties together to create that shared understanding, then we're creating specifically a shared understanding around structural inequity. That when we're assessing our state of readiness, we're specifically identifying the policies and the programs and the gaps therein. But we're also creating an opportunity to address implicit bias. When we have those cross-sector partners to the table, we can hold each other accountable to create equitable access. Hold ourselves accountable on how we will measure policy and practice change. And with community at the table, because there's nothing, as the saying goes, not about us without us. So the community is at that table to not only tell you about the experience of adversity, but it's also there to prioritize the issues of which we will address and co-create the solutions. That means that we recognize and respect the wisdom of community side by side with all of our fancy degrees. That's what building community resilience looks like and what it takes. And so specifically in Pierce County, one of the areas that we're looking at in the report that we produced is the housing cost burden and insecurity. And that this is one of the easily, regardless of what community we're in across the country, when you talk about disrupting poverty, looking at housing is one of those. It's not just about income attainment. It's also about affordability and availability of housing so that you can begin to build that ladder to economic mobility and stability and generational wealth. But the vestiges of redlining in Tacoma, Pierce County, just like any other community across the country, are still there. And we can measure them and looking at the housing cost burden as well as housing insecurity. There are multiple ways to measure what are the inequities in our community that are driven by these historical policies, and that in order to disrupt poverty, as we are all challenged here today, is that we have to go way upstream, beyond designing programs, but also disrupting systems by fundamentally disrupting structural racism. So where do we start? As I mentioned earlier, housing, public education, law enforcement, and criminal justice are important pillars of communities that drive many of the inequities that we see. And so if we're looking at education as a ladder to success, we have to also consider the impediments to actually being able to attain higher education, whether that's high school, whether that's an AA degree or a bachelor's degree and beyond. What are those impediments? Living in a poor neighborhood, low educational attainment, lack of access to employment, low income and poor health. What do these things point to? They point to housing, they point to education, they point to economic development, they point to access to care. These are fundamental pillars of community resilience. And why is it important to always zoom out to community resilience? Because we can't produce resilient individuals if they are not in a community that actually supports resilience. And so this goes back to the science of Ann Maston from years ago and understanding what are those elements that help children bounce back after being exposed to abuse and neglect. We understand these things. So if we apply these things not just to children, but to the families that these children need and the communities that the families need, then we can begin to understand what are the supports and buffers that we need to help people not only bounce back from adversity, whether that's abuse, neglect, loss of a job, it's also what needs to be put in place so that they can bounce forward. These individual level factors, personal characteristics and personal traits. We know that the number one factor for nurturing a resilient child is to have one adult in their life, one safe and stable adult. Well, what does it take for an adult to be safe and stable? They have to be able to know that they have the ability to have access to safe and stable housing, a social circuit that supports them, stable employment, spousal support, family coherence. And those things don't just come organically. They come because there's a community that can actually support that, whether those are peer-to-peer relationships, religious affiliations, community cohesion, economic development, civic engagement, all these things that foster social cohesion, but also social capital, meaning that our communities that we serve actually not only support each other, but they have the ability to go to these systems and actually from the systems advocate for what they need, and the systems are listening, and the systems are responsive, and the systems are actually putting the supports and buffers in place so these individuals are moving forward and thriving, moving from poverty to possibility. So when we think about how we'll measure resilience, how we'll measure our progress of moving to possibilities, think about key indices. Many of them we have outlined in the report for United Way, but I want to give you a few to imagine what this tree looks like when it's verdant, when it's green. That we have fewer children in foster care, that we have supported adults in healthy households. We have a reduction in neighborhood crime. We have fewer youth in mental health crises. We have families drawing on their strengths that are supported by the community and the resources and assets put in place. Steady employment. There are ways of measuring both inequity and tracking our progress towards equity. That's at the center of our work, creating these community dashboards. It goes beyond just looking at income. It's looking at a whole ecosystem that actually promotes resilience. That is what we look at in our work, and that is the challenge for you. That's the challenge for this group. How do we move from just thinking about programs and practices to really, truly disrupting a system that has created cyclical poverty and guaranteed it for some? We can do this because we believe that what gets measured is what gets done. And all of the measures of resilience and all of the measures of equity are in front of us. The challenge to us today is to create the political will for change. And that will is with us. And that moment is now. So the challenge to you is, what will you do? What will you do today? And what will you continue to do to build community resilience? Because that's the only way that we will disrupt the cycles of poverty. That is our possibility. Thank you so much. Thank you for being patient with me as we had technical difficulties, but thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. And I look forward to doing this work with you together.
Thank you so very much. I love it. That's wonderful. Thank you so very much, Wendy. Wow. A lot of great information, a lot for us to really think about as a community. But one of the things that stood out when you talked about, you can't have resilient individuals without, having a community that supports resiliency and looking at how we build that and the things that we need to be thinking about in the community and the people that we need to have around the table is critically important. That it's not just a nonprofit issue, but it is a community issue, and we need to make sure that we have all of the individuals around the table so that we really do understand the lived experience of trauma. So thank you again so very much. I know you're going to be able to stick around for a little bit to be a part of our panel. But before we get to the panel, what we're going to do is go to the second Pitch to Ditch video.
Tacoma's housing and homelessness crisis was declared a city emergency in 2017. The crisis is especially evident in the areas surrounding Nativity House, an emergency shelter for adults in Hilltop. The street directly behind Nativity, G Street, has long been a gathering place for folks without shelter. Due to COVID-19, limited capacity at shelters has further decreased to maintain social distancing protocols, leaving even more people on the streets. Over the course of the last few months, residents of G Street, both housed and unhoused, work to come together in the G Street Collective to co-create new ways to live in community.
When some of us neighbors started asking questions about just that question of how to live better together, considering that we have neighbors that stay in tents and neighbors that stay in cars and neighbors that live in houses, and there's all these different conflicting needs. So what we decided is that we were going to have a meeting back here in the patio and invite everyone on the block to come and kind of share what's been going on for them. And we had a first meeting, and we had a good amount of folks back here, and we had a few meetings after that. And then of course it was still COVID time, so we were like, okay, we need to not have that many people at a meeting, but the momentum was good because we were having conversations and building relationships that weren't being maintained before.
The G Street Collective has really it's pushed us to be creative in ways that I think are really important, to really push ourselves to consider the way that we need to be collaborators with the people who are living outside.
It's just kind of refreshing to notice that it's possible for there to be kind of a peaceful and productive dynamic.
Throughout these community conversations, the G Street Collective identified several high priority needs. With the Pitch to Ditch Poverty Grant, the G Street Collective is hoping to provide necessary cleaning supplies, improved water access, a public works bike stand, and a permanent Sharps container in partnership with the Tacoma Needle Exchange.
The Sharps container is good because I've seen some needles around. This street's been trashed. This area's been absolutely trashed in the past, and it's a lot better. They've done a good job, but the main thing would be the water access, refuse disposal or collection.
I think it's been important for us, some of us neighbors that are housed, to think about and shift our power and our privilege.
It's a challenge to remember that in order for folks to be on the street making more decisions for themselves, we actually have to be making fewer.
I know everybody, and people come to me for advice, I guess. Since I grew up in the neighborhood, I know the residences, and I guess they respect me. So
it's nice to see people that haven't had a voice have a voice finally. People that have felt like the world just did not care about you, and they don't want to hear it. Because too often, I think, if you're looking at like homeless programs and things, it's run by experts, but they're experts that have never lived it, that don't have any actual experience. And they tend to dismiss the people that are actually living it. Long-term, big dream, there's no longer a need for us. I hope we get to be obsolete. I hope that we're able to get with more people and solve the issues. We're able to help a little portion, but it's just the end result of a lot of other big issues. They're leading people to find themselves here. I think at some point it would be nice to see more of the causes that lead people to this environment addressed.
So now I am going to turn over the mic to Carol Mitchell, who's going to be our panel moderator for today. And Carol is back again with us. For those of you that have participated in past Poverty Possibilities, she's joining us again today. Carol holds a Juris Doctorate from Seattle University School of Law, a Master's of Arts in Organizational Systems Renewal from Seattle University, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from the University of Washington, Seattle. She founded the Institute for Black Justice in September of 2020. The purpose of the IBJ is to relentlessly pursue equity and justice for all. Carol has more than 20 years of public sector experience, having served most recently in Pierce County. Her primary responsibility was to improve outcomes for individuals with behavioral health and substance use conditions who were caught in the grip of the criminal justice system. Carol has spent 17 years as a host of TV Tacoma City Line, a public affairs talk show. She's a volunteer in community, and probably most importantly, she's proud to be a service in her community, her soon-to-be 85-year-old mother, 3 adult children, and her 6 grandchildren. So Carol, welcome, and you take it from here.
Thank you, Donna. Are you all able to hear me okay? It's been a pleasure so far this morning to be with all of you virtually. I especially enjoyed Dr. Ellis's presentation. It was so rich and so full of content. It's going to be hard to narrow down the question that both Donna and I have been formulating for her this morning as part of our panel. As you know, each year, the main purpose of the summit is to continue to broaden knowledge and ownership among community stakeholders about systemic barriers to moving out of poverty. So we hope that you walk away with an understanding of what actions you can personally take to address poverty. And as you've heard it said earlier, COVID-19 has shed some light on many of the ongoing inequities, as Dr. Ellis would say, those that are at the root of our adversity, and also ongoing inequity and injustices in our system. Equity must always be at the center. Thank you, Dr. Ellis, for reinforcing that concept if we truly want to have resilient communities. So there's much work left to do, but I'm confident that with the collective power of our community, we can get it done. So let's get to our panel because I'm so excited to hear from them today. We've gathered some experts, subject matter experts, you might call them, some leaders and some activists so that you can enjoy a rich dialogue between them with their diverse perspectives. Everyone's bio should be available to you, so we won't take time to read through them all. You already know Dr. Wendy Ellis, who was just presenting to all of us. Thank you very much for your resilience in overcoming all of the technology challenges that we all have to learn how to master in public. Ann Schenkel was unable to be with us today. Like me, she takes care of her mother, and so her mother has some issues today that she had to address. But she would have been here representing as the Director of Behavioral Health at Hope Spark. So our prayers and thoughts are with you and your family, Ann. Lawrence Garrett is also with us. He's the founder of 828 LLC. He focuses on equity, leadership, and inclusion, primarily in the greater Puget Sound area. And he has grown a reputation for getting to the heart of the matter by identifying specific behaviors that are directly impacting business outcomes. Thank you, Lawrence, for being here. Lori Finks, Dr. Lori Finks, that is a Senior Director for Economic Services Administration in the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. Economic Services Administration. I think that's the longest title, Lori, that we're going to have today. It's an important role because Lori is leading or one of the leading experts on the state's poverty reduction efforts, and she's also a facilitator for Governor Inslee's Poverty Reduction Work Group. Thank you, Lori. Sabrina Chambers, who I've known forever, is Strengthening Families Division Director and the lead for the Racism and Resilience Action Response Team for the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department. So thank you, Sabrina, for being with us today. And finally, Juanita Maestas, who serves on the statewide Poverty Action Network's Advisory Board, and she's the current board chair. She also serves on Governor Inslee's Poverty Reduction Work Group and is the co-chair of the work group steering committee. Let's welcome all of our panel members today. Is there applause possible here? I don't know. Is it possible? So let's start with Wendy Ellis, because we know, Wendy, that you have another commitment this morning, so you might need to leave us shortly. And not because of Zoom kicking you out, but because your valuable time and energy has to be invested elsewhere in just a little while. So I think all of us intuitively know or knew that systemic and historical inequities were at the root of some of the adverse community environmental issues that you have raised. Have you seen any places in your work that you would consider to be bright spots, perhaps programmatic offerings or structural changes that have happened that Tacoma and Pierce County could look to as a template or a model for what could happen?
Yeah, I wish I could say that we have an actual model, like someone's doing it right. You know, I think one of the things that we have to be willing to celebrate is the fact that we are having this conversation in the public dialogue right now, that we are normalizing the conversation around structural racism, and we are being quite specific and pinpointing what are those specific policies and drivers. So where I am seeing the brightest hope is where this is part of the public dialogue, where we're going beyond performative language that has been part of, you know, what we've seen in 2020, all these declarations, and saying, okay, but now how will we put our money where our mouth is, right? And that's the job of this group and many other groups across the country. And so where I feel like the bright spots are where there are individuals, where there are organizations, where there are city leaders and policymakers that are saying, how will we get under the hood and actually dismantle this? What are those specific policies that need to be addressed? And so, you know, when we talk about the models, you know, the local health departments that we're working with across this country, I see where the work that they're doing actually provides a pathway forward for many of the communities. Specifically, I'll point out to Louisville, Kentucky, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. They were cohort 1 of our Resilience Catalyst work with the local health departments. And the work there starts at looking at the intersection of adverse childhood experiences, suicide, opioids, and opioid use, and adverse childhood experience, suicide, opioid abuse. So the intersection of those three. Now you might say, well, how does that get to structural inequity? Well, we know that, number one, substance abuse is also not just an addiction, but it's also a means by which people begin to inoculate themselves from despair, self-medicating. And so those that are, when we look at communities that have been especially hard hit by opioid use and abuse, it has been a symptom of despair, whether that's economic despair, whether that's generational oppression. And yes, we've gotten a lot of headlines about what's happened in rural America, but when you look at what is driving the despair in rural America, it's the same things that have been driving despair in communities of color throughout our history. It's just that now we have an opportunity to begin to put a spotlight on those policies and say, well, wait a minute. What's driving this? And helping to normalize this understanding that when we see systemic inequity, yes, it was put in place as a means by which to hold back communities of color. But in 2020, you know, systems are color agnostic. Those policies are only doing exactly what they were programmed to do. So when you see the widespread economic inequality in this country that is happening across all races, it's because it is agnostic of the color. The only color that really mattered in the beginning was green. And it was codified in our Constitution to begin with. And who would hold the green? White male landowners. And so when you see that production of that outcome increasingly in 2020, it begins to become a lot easier to then come back to the policies. And so in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they are looking at suicidality in African-American men, 18 to 24. Why that population is because historically, African-American men were least likely to commit suicide. We had a lower suicidality rate in African-American communities. And now suddenly it's exploding, and it's exploding in a very public means. It's not just someone
going and hanging themselves in a room, but it's these public displays of suicidality that really speaks to this despair, this complete loss of hope. And so having a local health department say, we're going to focus on that population because we recognize that if we can crack that nut, it is going to have a ripple effect across the entire community. In Louisville, Kentucky, they're looking at eviction rates, the disproportionality in communities of color, of eviction rates that have long been driven by economic disparity and certainly a racial intentionality there. But if they can crack, again, if they can crack that nut of inequity, then it has a ripple effect across the entire community. So that's where I'm seeing the bright spots, is like the lights going off, and particularly from a public health perspective, of making the connectivity to a racial disparity, and being able to connect it directly to a policy and saying that if we can solve it for this community, then we know we're going to have a larger population impact, because the larger growth of despair in this country and inequity in this country has its roots in the racial intentionality of policy that has been built upon layers and layers of policy over the history of our country.
Thank you for that. It's going to be an interesting dialogue, I think, with Sabrina Chambers to talk about why the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department has now drawn a line in the sand and has joined this work along with you in looking at inequity as a public health crisis. I'm very excited about it. So thank you very much, Dr. Ellis, for continuing the energy and keeping it high. You started us off in a pretty deep and powerful way, and so thank you very much for that response also. I want to go now to Lawrence Garrett, who has his own story of adversity and resilience. And Lawrence, thanks for being here this morning. Based on some of the things you heard from Dr. Ellis and your own experience, I'm wondering how those experiences have shaped the work that you're now doing, the equity work in particular, with businesses and nonprofits, especially in the context of what I call Freedom Summer that we just had, another Freedom Summer. How has all of this affected the work that you're doing?
Well, thank you, Carol. I want to start by sharing a story, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to share a little bit more of kind of like how I got to where I am today. And so on August 28, 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and Louisiana, and where I lived at the time. And so I was a young 24-year-old, no family, no kids. And I just wanted to get as far away from possible of the Southeast. So what's opposite of Southeast? Northwest. That's how I made it here to Seattle. There's no rhyme, there was no reason, but to say that I drastically wanted to get away from everything that I was witnessing and watching during that time. And so similarly to our current pandemic, there's some striking similarity between Hurricane Katrina and this current pandemic. And it was at the snap of the finger that my entire life and many other lives had been completely turned upside down. And it wasn't just the fact that there was resources needed specifically for my physical needs. It was the fact that I had lost a vision for what my life was supposed to be and where it was supposed to go. And so as I find myself as a young 23 or 24-year-old here in the Pacific Northwest, just trying to navigate a new life, I come across 3 different types of organizations that I noticed who were there to supposed to support me and to help me kind of start a new life. And so there were relationship-based organizations, responsive-based organizations, and reactive-based organizations. So let me explain all 3 of those. The relationship-based organizations supported my entire being. It wasn't just my physical needs that I noticed, but they also cared for my mental, emotional, and my social needs, and they treated it as a priority. I remember at one point in time when I was at the cookout, I remember someone sharing, I remember having an opportunity to say, I did not realize that I needed hope in my heart just as much as I needed a resource in my hand. And so oftentimes we lose sight that it's the vision piece, it's the hope piece that we don't get a chance to minister to. And so the second one was responsive organizations. And they were really good at coordinated care. So they anticipated my future needs. They set up a roadmap for me. These organizations were really helpful in helping me stabilize housing. They were able to help me establish a stable income. But I'll tell you, the biggest difference that I noticed between the relationship-based organizations and the responsive-based organizations was this. They both were really good at job training, job placement. But it was the relationship-based organization that sent me a list of the top 5 barbers in the area because they knew that I needed to get a fresh haircut, right, as well. It's those things, right? Now, I know there's some brothers out here, they get what I'm saying, right? Like, I needed that fresh taper. And so—
Hey, there's some sisters that get it too.
Right, you're right. So the thing is, it was that extra support, it was that extra thoughtfulness, that it wasn't just I'm a customer, I'm a number. It was like, no, this guy is not only is he moving, matriculating through, having a new life here, but he needs to know where the good barbers to go to, right? So with that being said, I was really happy to be able to see that distinction between relationship-based organizations and responsive-based. And then the last one was reactive organizations. I mean, they were simply just transactional. My name, my life wasn't unique, nor was it really important to them. I was just a number. I was a customer. And the worst feeling in the world for me, and I really hope people grasp what I'm about to say next, and many of our neighbors, our friends, our family members are feeling this emotion right now. It was this perpetual feeling of being a problem for people. It was this feeling I was a nuisance, that somehow I was needy. And yet this was the first time in my life I had even experienced something like this. And what was stripped away from me in that moment was my personal dignity. And if we really want to get clear, it was my humanity. And so it was this feeling that still stays with me to this day, 15 years later. And this is what drives me. This is the foundation on why I do the work that I do today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. That's a powerful noticing that, and thank you for expressing, I think, what a lot of people feel when there is some basic need that they're trying simply to have met for themselves or their children, and the dehumanizing experience that sometimes happen inside of organizations, frankly, partly because of what Dr. Ellis said, right? Some of them are anchored in a root system of structural inequity. And a friend of mine recently used the words poverty pimping. Now, I hate to be so street, but that's what some of them are engaged in. They make their living off of the poor. And so I think it's really important for us to remember the humanity of the person standing in front of us. Thank you for bringing that out. I want to go now to Lori Finks, Dr. Finks, who in January of 2020, the Washington State Poverty Reduction Work Group released 8 strategies and 56 recommendations. That's a lot, Dr. Finks. But it was part of Governor Inslee's 10-year vision for the state. And the first 2 strategies, guess what, were focused on understanding structural racism and historical trauma, and ensuring, Lawrence, that perhaps people who came because of Katrina or who are here, have been here for generations, that if they're impacted by poverty or need, that they need to be part of the decision making. I think Dr. Ellis made that point as well, that I wrote down what she said, that we needed to have a respect for community wisdom. And so, Dr. Finks, could you share with us a little bit about that journey? What were some things you learned? Please tell us that humanizing the experience was part of what came out of the dialogue, but specifically about the systems, structures, and people. What would you consider success?
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. And it's so great to be here. And it's hard to follow Wendy, which this is not the first time I've had to do this. And then Lawrence, it's just an honor to be on this panel. So yeah, it was a big effort. the governor's poverty reduction work. And, you know, he asked us for a comprehensive 10-year plan to reduce poverty and inequality. And that's what he got with those 8 strategies and 56 recommendations. Because as Wendy said, you know, this is cross-sector, cross-sectional, multi-jurisdictional, and it's going to take all of us to accomplish that goal. But the journey was really, I think, transformational for a lot of people. And the reason was because we did 2 things well from the beginning. One was the choice to center race in our work, and equity across the board, but, you know, grounding it in racial justice. And 2 was we centered people who were disproportionately affected by poverty in the work. And, you know, one of the, like the highlights of my career and, you know, my privilege was to work alongside Juanita Maestas and her colleague Drayton Jackson, who were the co-chairs of our steering committee. And that steering committee was made up of 22 people, you know, who are experiencing poverty and really had the power to judge whether or not we were on the right track. And you know, had the final approval over that plan. And when they were sitting in the room with us, you know, and a bunch of government agencies, many of them who our steering committee members were receiving assistance from in some way, shape, or form. It's just really harder to judge somebody when they're sitting right next to you, sitting across from you, when the power dynamic is leveled. And it's just much easier to believe them. And it's the heart of the work. And as we did that, you know, I think that the group quickly realized, and I think Lawrence, you just said this so beautifully, you know, that poverty is an economic issue, and a lot of our policies focus on the economics of poverty, and that's important. But equally, if not more important, is that poverty is about belonging. It's about dignity. And when our systems were set up to exclude and punish, and that's true of health and human services, that's true of juvenile justice, criminal justice, mental health, right? When they're set up to exclude, whether it's by race or LGBTQ, you know, immigration, disability, you quickly realize that you could never be successful if you don't open up a space where people feel like they belong and have dignity. And as Lauren said, you know, you see their humanity. And that's what the steering committee allowed us to do. So I think our group realized that our systems are being crushed by the weight of inequality and injustice. And we opened up a space, an umbrella for this work that hasn't existed in Washington State before. And so, you know, the success really is we created a space for change to occur. And now the challenge, and I think, you know, Dr. Ellis is saying this, how do we occupy that space? Because we are the system. And so we spend our time now with this plan, challenging our colleagues in state government around the very policies that have been highlighted today. How are we going to show up to change that system and disrupt the status quo?
It's a powerful question, and I know that you're going to be working on the answer to it, since it sounds like this is a long-term, as it should be, a long-term strategy or set of strategies that you're going to have a lot of leadership control over. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more about it. And in just a few minutes, we'll talk to Juanita Maestas, who was one of the co-chairs of that steering committee, about her experience. So we'll look forward to that. But before we get to it, I want to get to my friend Sabrina Chambers and ask about the health department's perspective, especially in light of COVID-19. This last spring and summer, I think we were at the vortex of both a pandemic and an epidemic. The epidemic of structural racism intersects with the pandemic of COVID-19. And our Tacoma Pierce County Health Department decided to put a stand or put a line in the sand about equity and resilience. And so, Sabrina, what was the driver for the health department to declare racism as a public health issue? That was pretty provocative.
Well, first I have to say I am so honored and humbled to be a part of this panel. And as you know, super duper excited to be a part of the process moving forward with the assistance from Dr. Ellis's group. So I just want to put that little commercial in there and just say I'm super excited. So sorry for that little detour, but I had to say it.
Commercials allowed.
Oh, appreciate it. So how do we get here? I think our community in Pierce County, just like other communities nationwide, are just outraged and angry and frustrated over George Floyd's death, and even a death in Tacoma. Manuel Ellis died under similar circumstances as Mr. Floyd. And what we did, we joined others in condemning these killings and calling for justice, healing, and really a concentrated effort for correcting the underlying institutions, systems, and conditions that perpetuate violence and inequities. Now, in public health, we know social, emotional, economic, and environmental factors are the major drivers of our health. Racism is interwoven with these factors and is especially strong for our Black communities, who suffered through what Dr. Ellis so eloquently shared, the legacies of slavery and centuries of systematic discriminations. Now, members of our racial and ethnic communities and other marginalized communities suffer significant health disparities. They are sicker, suffer more violence, and die young. The health inequities mean they will never reach their full potential. So in June of this year, the department stood up and created our Racism and Resilience Action Response Team. And we were very intentional in the name because we wanted this to be an action team. And we know resilience is the way to move this work forward. Now, our charge was to develop strategies to address racism within our own organizations and to elevate the issues that contribute to the health, like education, housing, access to healthcare, health inequities. Now, we also know that we can solve disparities by changing the system that caused them. And we have 4 strategies focusing on data, which elevate racism as a public health crisis through data. We know we have to have training and education, a shared vision, shared knowledge. So we have to support our staff and commit to the department-wide anti-racist development. And we know it's focusing on policies. Now, develop and support racial equity policies, commit to a racial equity and communication strategies in all we do. And we know we have to find some sustainability for this work to be transformed. If we're going to transform systematic racism, we have to fund it. So on June 17th, our Tacoma Pierce County Board of Health took a bold action to address the legacy of racism. Board members unanimously passed a resolution that declares racism as a public health issue. Now, in the resolution, the health department was charged to assess internal policies and procedures to address and reform structures and processes that contribute to race-based decisions and actions. We were also charged to reshape our discourse and agenda to actively engage in anti-racist work, particularly in anti-Black racism. We also were charged to review our budget and make recommendations for funding changes. We will allocate or reallocate fundings for the work in transforming systematic racism. And we also know we can't do this alone. So working with partners and communities to co-create solutions. Policy promotes system level change within Pierce County to move beyond equity only, and also to include the undoing of racist structures. Now, to date, we had some wonderful accomplishment. We had a team that worked with BRFIS, which is the Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System, to include 2 questions on the next BRFIS. So that we were very successful. It's very hard. I'm not sure if you know, it's very hard to get questions added to the BRFIS. We focus on training. We've developed affinity groups. We did a roadmap for training because we know we have to have a common vision and we have to have a roadmap to get there. We've hired a consultant to help with this effort. We have a web page on our Tacoma Pierce County Health Department website. We have a page, TPCHD/racial equity. And we've also done some rapid assessments in our internal policies. We've focused on, and we will continue to focus on our partnership and also funding. We have secured funding to hire a project manager to help continue this work, because right now we're stood up as an incident command structure where that basically is emergency. And we have dedicated staff time to do this emergency, but we have to sustain this. So we are hiring a project manager to help move that work forward, and also hiring a project manager to assist us with the Resilience Catalyst work that we're going to be doing with Dr. Ellis's group, along with NACCHO. I know it was a lot, but I'm just super excited to be a part of this.
It is exciting. It's very exciting, and even more so that you're going to be working with Dr. Ellis. And I'm hoping that some of the research work, and certainly the slides that we saw today, Dr. Ellis, that can become part of a community library that we can have access to for some of the other work that needs to be done in some of the other public entities across the county. So thank you, Sabrina, and thank you to the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department for stepping out there, boldly going where no public entity has gone before in Pierce County. And Juanita Maestas, you boldly went to the chair of the steering committee for the Governor's Poverty Reduction Work Group that Dr. Finks was just talking about. I want you to tell me about your experience there and why you thought it was important for your voice and the voice of others, 21 others, I guess, to be heard as part of the poverty reduction plan. What was it like, and why do you think it was important?
When I first got involved, I had to put an application in to be on Governor Inslee's work group. And I thought it was just going to be a small work group, nothing too big. I was like, okay, I can deal with small groups. And one of my staff at Poverty Action, he was supposed to go with me, but something happened. So I said, I'm not going by myself. I need a sidekick. So I took Marcy Bowers, the executive director of Poverty Action. I said, you're going with me. And she's like, okay, I'll go. So when we started the meetings, it was kind of intense for me, because it was like, here's the bigger group that I've been trying to get them to help people that are in poverty, understand what we're going through, kind of change the system, you know, so we can be able to survive. It was intense. And as we got through the meetings and stuff, I started feeling more comfortable. And we decided that instead of numbers and data entry, we needed voices, because your voice is the most powerful thing you can ever have. You know, you can walk down the street and say hi to somebody and you can make their day. So we decided to look in the communities, and we came up with the steering committee, which consists of 22 people from Vancouver, Washington, all the way to Whidbey Island, and then way out in the desert or the woods and stuff. Everybody has the same conclusion, that one fix can, or if you have a bunch of issues, not one solution can fix all those issues. And that's what we were talking about. And we were talking about everybody's different situations, how there's so many roadblocks. How can we change everything and, you know, build this up to where people can hear us? And another thing that was hard for us was trust. Who can we trust? Who will listen to us? So we brought Lori in, and from the first time I met Lori, I was like, man, you know, she's got to listen to us, and she has a heart, and she has compassion for people that are in poverty and wants to make this change. So we brought Lori in, and this woman took like paintball throws at her, and people are just like, we don't trust you, we don't know who you are, you know, can you do this, can you make this happen? And despite we've had our disagreements, we've had our agreements, we've had tears, we've had happiness, but all in all, Lori stood by us through the sunshine and storms. And so we brought the steering committee to the bigger work group. And here's what we have. You have people that can't get benefits because they've been incarcerated. You have people that can't get the housing that they need because they're homeless, because they don't fit into this bracket that they need to get their housing, or, you know, people just don't have the right childcare to go to work and make enough money to, you know, take care of their families. So for us, our voice was the one thing that we wanted to help make the change. And the steering committee got to work with the bigger work group. I call it the bigger work group. And, you know, it was so amazing because there's people in there that actually listen to us, and we didn't know what to think. I mean, there's no words to say it. And to go into a group of, what was it, like 75 people, 65 people, and have them sit there and listen to us and then ask us questions. How can we help you? You know, how can we build this road? How? And I said, communication, communicate with us. And I think that's a lot of issues that people are having, is the communications. Because unless you have that, you don't know what's going on with that person. And with us, we wanted to be heard. We know we can do this. And from a lot of legislators and a lot of people that are in this meeting, you want to hear from us. You want to know, what will it take to help make poverty, reduce poverty? Because I don't think it'll ever go away, but we can reduce it. But it was an amazing adventure, and we're still going, you know. And I just have to say, you know, Lori is like my leader. I can go to her with anything, you know. And to understand the language between the bigger work group and the steering committee was somewhat a barrier, because you got all these big words that we didn't understand. How do we get through this? And so I'd ask Marcy to interpret for me. She was my interpreter. Because if they said something, I'm like, what does that mean? Where does that go? But all in all, I'm very happy as to the steps that we have taken with the bigger work group, and we appreciate the work that they've opened our doors and listened to us. And now we're making a change, and everybody feels so good about that. So we are.
Thank you, Juanita. I think I can certainly sense the passion. You know, I'm struck by the amazement that you just shared, that people would actually listen. I mean, that struck me as telling, because it's almost as if you were surprised by that. And yet you were, yes.
We were.
And yet it's so important. And I'm really happy that the poverty reduction work group understood in their overall design how important it was to have those for whom they were designing the programming in the room.
Right.
And treated as co-designers. You know better than anyone else what you need and
yes.
What is going to be helpful to you. So Lori, I want to come back to you, and also to Lawrence for if we have time here. I think we have just a few minutes left. Because first of all, congratulations on Juanita. I think she just gave you a high compliment for that trust building that you must have done to create the communication that has to happen. Let me ask very quickly about the Kresge Foundation grant that you have, DSHS was awarded, and how we can reimagine health and human services through the eyes of people we serve. Do you want to talk just briefly about that? It seems like that's a continuation of this great work that you've started with the poverty reduction work group. And then I want to have, I think we'll have time, Lawrence, for a quick follow-up question to you, and then a final question for everyone.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, Juanita is incredible. And wherever we're going, we're going together. Just thank you, Juanita, for your leadership, because we would not be here without you. The next gen work is, you're right, it's an extension. And the goal of it was to reimagine health and human services through the eyes of the people we serve in the communities in which they reside. And the setup for that work was really, when I first came to DSHS, which was 4.5 years ago, we did listening sessions all over the state about what people were experiencing, and that every community was different. Every community, while there were certainly commonalities in the experiences of poverty, the root causes of poverty in every community differed. And so we asked people, what do you need? What would you like to see? And communities know what's best for their residents. So we were very fortunate that an opportunity came from the Kresge Foundation, and there were 4 communities that were especially, I think, ready to take on this work. And doing just like, they're all different, they're all fascinating. And Pierce County, and we had a big meeting with Donna in that listening tour. We got to meet Sabrina and lots of other folks. And so we spearheaded that work in collaboration with Dr. Ellis and Building Community Resilience. I don't have enough time. Again, just being in collaboration with people who are most affected by these issues, with communities who know their residents better, and just being open in a state policy position to just, share the work and to be willing to show up and try to make change. And that is the space I was talking about, that I have never seen. Been working on these issues my whole life. I have never seen so much energy, enthusiasm, and willingness to be vulnerable and to disrupt what needs to be disrupted so we can, get the results we say we all want. So it's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Dr. Finks, thank you very much for the great work that you're doing. And Juanita, thank you also for the time and the energy, and frankly, the courage that it must have taken for you to have those conversations with all those doctors and lawyers in the room. I can just imagine how intimidating that might have been. But
it wasn't easy.
But they're people too, so don't, they just have a few more D's and A's after their name. Lawrence, real quickly, I know that you recently published the Equity Starter Kit, and your focus has been quite a bit on building equity in schools, one of those infrastructure spaces that Dr. Ellis referred to as being so critically important to the community environment. Tell us a little bit about how that is working for you, how you see the shift happening for the maximum impact in schools.
Well, I appreciate the promo for the book. Thank you for that, Carol. I want to address this question, but I also want to address it to nonprofits and to business organizations alike in 4 different segments within the organization. And at first, I want to address the executive level leadership in regards to equity. And here's what I'm noticing as a pattern and as a theme of what's needed right now. We need our executive teams to lead equity and not just do equity work. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes it's kind of pushed to a group of people to lead the work. And so there's buy-in. Yes, you want it done. But what we're asking for specifically is that this may be the time where you need to hire that executive coach, where you need to specifically carve out time to get a professional that is going to help you not just be an equity believer, but you're going to be an equity leader. So that's on the executive end. On the senior management and director level end, what I hope is that we recognize, or I would say you recognize, that the benefits are always going to outweigh the cost. We all recognize doing this work, there's a risk and reward factor, but I want us to focus, and I'll tell you, when I say we, I'm talking about our community. I'm talking about your staff. They want you focused on the reward of this, the benefit of this. And trust me, anything can be politicized, right? We've got masks right now that have somehow become politicized. The color of my skin at some point has been politicized from the very formation of this nation, right? We've had a civil war over my skin. We've had civil rights and the battle of voting over my skin. So the idea that something can be politicized is unavoidable, okay? So, and what we're saying with this is that recognize that the people who need you the most, those who are voiceless, right? Those who are dealing with hopelessness right now, that's where your attention needs to be focused on. That's where your eyes need to be fixed on. Those who need you and not those who don't. For the staff, which we know more times than not, it's the staff who are the most passionate about this work. They're the ones that are driving this work. They're the ones that are speaking truth to power. I want to share it with all those staff members out there. You keep doing your thing. You keep finding the supports that you need to continue to do this work. And when I say you find the supports, that means you need to continue to find spaces where you are more celebrated than tolerated. And if you're in an organization where you are feeling like you are being tolerated more than you're being celebrated, maybe that's not the organization for you. And I know I might have disrupted something just by saying that word right there. So lastly, to our clients and constituents, keep asking and demanding and changes in outcomes. Keep asking the tough questions. Keep pushing for transparency for our organizations and help them avoid performative allyship and bait and switch protocols, and ask for the real. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. I think you might have just set off some fire in some folks' minds and hearts. If you feel like you are just being tolerated, that might not be the right place for you to be. You might just have to leave and start the Institute for Black Justice. Just kidding. I had to throw that in. But I want to thank all of you for your very thoughtful responses to the questions today and for being part of the panel. My final question to you all, starting with Sabrina and then Juanita and Lawrence and Dr. Pfingst. My final question to you is more on the hopeful side, and that is, given everything that's going on right now in the world, both well, worldwide, nationally, locally, what are 3 hopeful words that you'd like to leave with us today? 3 hopeful words. Sabrina, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start.
What do you have for us?
I think I love how you ask the hopeful words, because when I think of hope, I think of possibilities. So the words is possibilities. And another word I think of is networking, because we can't do it without, the possibilities can never happen without a network. And also common, you know, we may not look common now, but the reality of it is we need to really look at each other. And the word I say common, and the common theme for everything is love. We just focus on love, you know.
Thank you, Sabrina. Okay, Juanita. 3 hopeful words, maybe something your grandsons would say.
No.
Okay, you have to clean up whatever it is.
Communication, trust. There's got to be trust there, and the ability to listen to what people have to say without judgment.
Thank you, Juanita. That's just great advice all the time, right?
Yes, I say it every day to Anthony.
Is that your grandson?
Yeah, the older one, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And Lori, 3 hopeful words.
Community, sisterhood and brotherhood, and love at all costs.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting a consistent theme about love being sort of at the root system. All right, Lawrence, you're going to close us out with 3 hopeful words for today, please.
Sure. The first one is kairos or kairos and not the word chronos. And what I'm saying is this is our moment. This is our time. The equity movement will finish and complete what the civil rights movement started in the 60s. Own it. This is our time. Kairos. The next one is reimagine. We're going to become an America that we've never become before. It's our generation. It's our time. It is our moment. And the last one is expected, right? We can go beyond belief. We can go beyond hope. Once we decide to move into this space, we are expecting this to happen in our season. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And that was a beautiful way to end the panel discussion. I'm going to give you my very own applause. Hopefully you can see it. Yay. We're now going to be going into breakout groups. We've got over 300 people on the line this morning, and 200 of you will be in groups. The rest of you will stay in the main auditorium for the discussion. And we're asking that one person in each of the group become the note taker, and note takers will then email their notes, and we'll put Heidi's email in the chat box. So go take a look at the chat box. Note makers, you're going to be emailing your notes to Heidi. And again, her email will be in the chat box. And here's the question in your group for you to think about. And for those of you in the larger audience to think about in a reflective way. What are your key takeaways? And what are things that we can do to build more resilient and equitable communities? All right, 2 questions. What are your key takeaways? And what are things we could do to build more resilient and equitable communities? If you're in a group, have a discussion, pick a note taker and have the note taker email their answers to Heidi. And if you're an individual, you can also send your notes into the chat or your comments into the chat. So take a moment, refresh your coffee, get a stretch, answer those 2 questions, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you. See you then. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, and we apologize if you were confused about whether that break was for your discussion or for your body, and so hopefully you took care of both. You got some thoughts out, and your note takers have emailed those to Heidi, and then you also took time to care for your body. And if you didn't get a chance to care for your body, then maybe you can take a minute or 2 even now as I introduce the next Pitch to Ditch video to go get yourself something to drink and get back. So you've watched 2 Pitch to Ditch videos already, DQ Evans 253 Camp and the G Street Collective, and this is the 3rd of those and the final Pitch to Ditch poverty project. It's called Your Health Matters COVID-19 Prevention Program for Communities of Color. It is designed to build partnerships and engage Hilltop neighborhood businesses, churches, and residents to promote health, wellness, and disease prevention during the coronavirus epidemic. And so take a look at this. We definitely want you to watch this 3rd Pitch to Ditch.
Hello, my name is Dr. Robin Jones. I'm the president and founder of Children's International Health Relief, a nonprofit 501c3 organization. The name of our project is Your Health Matters. It is a COVID prevention project for communities of color. For communities of color, the pandemic is a pandemic jumping on top of multiple existing epidemics. There's an epidemic of health disparities, poverty and low-wage jobs, police brutality, and mass incarceration, making people of color more vulnerable to dying from the virus. The goal of our project is to get people of color to take the virus seriously. That is why we started giving out COVID prevention packets to our dental patients at their checkup visits. In our COVID prevention packets, we have a toothbrush, we have a face mask with our logo, Your Health Matters. We are seeking funding to mass produce these masks. We have floss, And we have hand sanitizer. We have lots of health information. Information on how to build your immune system, COVID prevention tips, information on diet and nutrition, and information on oral health. Because a decayed abscess tooth is a source of infection in the body, which lowers one's immune response, which can make one more susceptible to catching COVID. We are seeking funding to start a youth entrepreneur mentorship program to teach young people how to make hand sanitizer and design and sew masks. The pandemic has forced us all to become more adaptable. Our kitchen tables are now classrooms, parents are now teachers and tutors, and our junkie closets are now home offices. So my dental office has adapted. We are now a youth entrepreneur mentorship program. Last week, we did a pilot study. We taught 4 kids how to make hand sanitizer and 2 girls how to use the sewing machine for the first time. We taught Amazion, a 10-year-old, who came to the dentist to have an extraction. After the procedure, we said, Amazion, would you like to learn how to make hand sanitizer? He was so excited. We also taught Ellis, 11-year-old, how to make hand sanitizer in the lobby while he was babysitting his 2 little sisters, and his mom was in the back clinic area getting an emergency extraction. And then there's Raya, who we taught how to make hand sanitizer and how to use the sewing machine for the first time. And then there's Najaya, a 17-year-old, who we taught how to sew a face mask. And lastly, we taught Jordan, my employee's son, how to make hand sanitizer at home, which he named Black Panther. So our pitch to ditch poverty is, it starts with the youth. It's our responsibility to give our youth a historical frame of reference by looking back in history so they can learn how our ancestors handled institutionalized racism, poverty, and oppression. Also, we like to teach them the story, what if there were no Black people in the world? To make them aware that the majority of the things that they use in their daily lives were invented by Black folks. We need to build up their confidence and self-esteem, to teach them that they are not victims of their circumstances, and then give them the tools to become co-creators of their own reality, so they can build an economy based on service and compassion. Thank you.
And thank you. And thank you to all of the 3 groups that submitted a pitch to ditch poverty proposal. We'd especially like to thank our finalists. Thank you for your participation today. You just heard from 3 teams, and you've been part of a bigger team today, and we're very grateful for that. Andrew Carnegie said, teamwork is the ability to work together toward a shared vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments toward organizational objectives. It is the fuel that allows ordinary people to attain uncommon results. So I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited to see these concepts take flight. And the moment you've all been waiting for, we will all watch a short video to jog our memory about each Pitch to Ditch Poverty Challenger. And now's the time to vote on who you believe should receive funding, support, and recognition. Which challenger has the big idea and project that you believe will address racial and social injustices that disproportionately impact individuals in poverty? The team with the most votes will be awarded, drum roll, $5,000. So it's significant. And the second place, $3,000, and the third, $2,000 to help expand the work that they're doing. So let's take a look. I think we've got a compilation video to watch, and we also have in your chat, we should have some polling coming up. So after the video, check the chat for your opportunity to vote.
My name is Quinn Evans. I made a lot of hasty decisions growing up, and this is what I want to do. Our sports camp helps students develop grit and resilience and access to mentorship. Your partnership will help us provide our young people with athletic gear, snacks, transportation, backpacks, non-perishables, and PPEs. We want our youth to feel a part of something special.
I'm a survivor of my own faith. Art became my healing. Extra funding would give us the opportunity to heal so many people in our community. I truly believe that your art is your reflection.
G Street has long been a gathering place for folks without shelter. Over the course of the last few months, residents of G Street, both housed and unhoused, worked to come together in the G Street Collective to co-create new ways to live in community.
It's pushed us to be creative in ways that I think are really important.
With the Pitch to Ditch Poverty Grant, the G Street Collective is hoping to provide necessary cleaning supplies, improved water access, a public works bike stand, and a permanent sharps container in partnership with the Tacoma Needle Exchange.
It's nice to see people that haven't had a voice have a voice finally.
For communities of color, the pandemic is a pandemic jumping on top of multiple existing epidemics. The goal of our project is to get people of color to take the virus seriously. We are seeking funding to start a youth entrepreneur mentorship program to teach young people how to make hand sanitizer and design and sew masks. It's our responsibility to give our youth a historical frame of reference. We need to build up their confidence and self-esteem, to teach them that they are not victims of their circumstances, and then give them the tools to become co-creators of their own reality.
Okay, thank you to all of the finalists. And we're going to give you another 10 seconds or so to finish up your voting, and then we will announce the winner. And from what I can see of the polls, it looks like it's going to be a fairly clear winner. And guess who it is? DQ Evans 253 Camp is the winner. Congratulations to DQ Evans 253 Camp. You have impressed this crowd today, this audience today, and they perceive you to be able to directly impact individual accomplishments, directly impact racial inequity through the work that you're doing. So thank you and congratulations to you. I'm going to turn it back over to Donna Panapinto, who is going to introduce the next big activity for today. I'm Carol Mitchell. Thanks very much for allowing me to participate in today's event.
Thank you so much, Carol. Also, DQ Evans was first place at $5,000. G Street Collaborative was second place. So they are at, will receive $3,000, and Your Health Matters prevention program from communities of color, you will receive $2,000. So everyone wins. Congratulations. Thank you again to the groups, and thank you, Carol, for moderating the panel, and we just always appreciate your involvement in our event. So let's see, we've covered a lot this morning. You know, as I think back to the keynote speaker, to Dr. Ellis, to the panel, the words, lots of words come to mind, and we'll be putting together a synopsis of this as well, is disruption. In that, how might we disrupt poverty by looking at and focusing on the intersections of the impacts of trauma, inequity, and how do we build community resilience? And several things came up around policy, that we can't address issues of inequity without focusing in on policy issues. We have to make sure that we understand the lived experience of individuals that are in trauma. we have to make sure that we make people feel that they belong, that there's dignity, respect, love has come up in the panel discussion. You know, how do we, you know, ensure that we really just are taking care of one another and that we love one another. It's you know, one of the other things too, as we do these events, you know, we're always asked, so what happened the last time? What happened as a result of the last event? Well, we had a report that was out, and all of you who attended last year, and we'll put this link in the chat as well, a report on our affordable housing, the activity that we did. And what we have done since then is we have focused a lot on advocacy issues, quite frankly, as a united way, focusing on, you know, making sure, for instance, you know, the temporary assistance for needy families. We advocated with others to make sure that that bill passed at the state level. We also looked at the Housing Trust Fund and advocating for a Housing Trust Fund. So we continue as a United Way to advocate, but what I would encourage is that report is we're taking pieces of it because there were some innovative solutions to come out of it, and we're beginning to talk to individuals. So for instance, dormitory of communal living for recent graduates, seeking individual homeowners willing to rent rooms, you know, separate apartment houses around common community resource. So, you know, there were a lot of ideas that came out of last year, and we're going to continue to work on those ideas. But what comes out of this is that the collective we, and how do we collectively work on all of these different strategies in our communities. So I want to thank, before we go on to the next part, which is our workshop, and I would encourage you to stay with the workshop. Divya McMillan will be conducting that along with her team of facilitators, but we are going to have gift card giveaways. So as an incentive to stay, we would love for, we're going to give away some gift cards throughout the part of the next session. So I want to thank our sponsors again for supporting this event year after year, and to thank my staff and to thank the support team that worked on this, even with the glitches. I think this was a really rewarding portion of the morning. And I'm reminded, you know, as we close up this section and get you ready for a real break, I'm reminded of the words of our keynote speaker a couple of years ago, Dr. Michael McAfee, who challenged our community. He put a challenge forth to us, a challenge that we embody radical imagination. And I think we've shown that we can embody radical imagination in dealing with the COVID pandemic and the racial injustices. And so I would just continue to encourage everyone, you know, to embody this idea, this notion of radical imagination as we disrupt poverty and we make sure that everyone has opportunities to live a life of dignity and respect. So next is Divya McMillan. I'm going to introduce her. Divya is professor. I'm getting an echo, hopefully. Are you guys hearing an echo? You, okay, I don't know why I'm getting an echo. Okay, it's gone. Divya McMillan is professor of global media studies and associate vice chancellor of innovation and global engagement at the University of Washington, Tacoma. McMillan's 3 critically acclaimed books, International Media Studies, Mediated Identities, Youth, Agency and Globalization, and Place, Power, and Media, have transformed global media studies by interrogating ideologies and audience and user agency. She is the recipient of the UW Distinguished Research Award in 2012 and the Distinguished Teaching Award in 2017. She serves on various international journals, editorial and book publishing review boards, as well as the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and the Charles Wright Academy Board of Directors. So with that, what we are going to do is we are going to take an actual break. So this is a 10-minute break. Get up, stretch, get some coffee, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes. And then I will turn it over to Divya, who will get you geared up for the facilitated breakout groups. And remember, we are going to have gift card giveaways. So I hope, I know that some of you are not able to stay with us, but I hope that many of you will be able to stay. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Back, and sorry about that. I forgot to put myself on mute, but I had to remember the most important thing, which is the raffles. So the first person who is, and you have to be present and you have to put it in the chat, send me, Donna, a private chat, Amber Mosleski, Tacoma Community College. You are the first winner of a $25 gift card. And it'll probably be an Amazon gift card, but we can deal with that after the program. So if you are here, you just need to let me know that you're here. Just send me in the chat box that you're here. The second person, the second raffle is Lori Jenkins. Lori, if you are still on the line and you want to put in the chat box to me privately, then we will get you get your gift card to you. So, okay. All right, now I am going to turn things over to Divya. So I introduced her right before this session. So Divya, you are on.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. All right, we are so excited to be here. Such an inspiring morning. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to Donna and the inspiring team at United Way of Pierce County. It's been just an amazing journey and absolutely a powerful example of what we can do through collaboration for our community. So thank you for this opportunity, Donna, to work with you and your team on this most amazing event, From Poverty to Possibilities. I am Divya McMillan from University of Washington, Tacoma Global Innovation and Design Lab. And I want to welcome my core team members, Chrissy Kimura, who's a program administrator from the GID Lab, and Lan Allison, who is project manager at United Way and also an alum of the GID Lab. With us, we have a very, very dedicated and committed team of facilitators, around 40 facilitators, straddling campus and community. So for us, this is just a wonderful example of a community of care. And every single speaker and the panelists of this morning talked about the importance of collaborating, of building this community of care. And we really felt that with our large team of facilitators who are from the University of Washington, Tacoma students, as well as from United Way. So special shout out to Casey for helping us gather this team. And I also wanted to say a huge recognition and thank you to Resilient Pierce County, with whom we did 2 design thinking workshops to develop materials for today. So I will get right into what we're going to do. And as I present, as I frame what we're going to do today, I will be bringing back some of the key points that our speakers made this morning. And I think those reminders are going to be really useful for us as we now move our ideas to action and we co-design together solutions for our community by centering the voices of those closest to the issues. And so here we go. Hope everybody's ready. This is going to be a very intense and a lot of fun, a very dynamic, interactive workshop that's going to straddle the space of 1 hour, and you will be amazed at what we're going to bring forth in just this 1 hour. So I'm really excited and thank you everyone for being here. So here we go. This is our ideas to action agenda. I will quickly share with you, we were supposed to start at 10:40. Don't worry about the start time, but we're going to keep as close as possible to our times for the group exercises and for big group shares. So we begin with a quick recap on what our how might we prompt is, our bias to action prompt. Every single participant in this room has received a pre-work packet where you were given this prompt and you were given a whole set of empathy stories to review and be prepared for this workshop. So we will provide a reminder of that prompt. I'll just provide a brief background on human-centered design. We provided some notes as well in your packet, and then an instruction for what we're going to do today. Then you move into your small groups for prototyping, and then a big group share. And folks, we want a big wall of innovations that are going to come out and really be symbolic of what we are doing in Pierce County. And so we want you to upload your prototypes to an email address and Google form that we've shared with you, and more on that to come. So thank you to my core team and this massive group of collaborators behind the scenes. This really feels like a big Indian wedding. This is what we do. Everybody has a role. Everybody is in there and it's all good. All right, so this is our prompt through a lens of equity, trauma, and resilience. How might we reimagine our current systems to support Alice families to overcome poverty? I just love the comments that Donna made at the beginning of this entire event, where Donna brought forth this lens of equity, trauma, resilience, and used the word lift a few times. That lift, that surge that we all want to build towards. So from trauma, we reimagine equitable systems. And from that, we feel this lift, this surge of the whole community as we move towards resilience. And so, the key point that Donna made was also the missed opportunity when we don't do this, how much more impoverished we are when we don't make spaces for this lift. We're using human-centered design, which aligns beautifully with the trauma, equity, resilience lens that Dr. Ellis presented to us this morning. And so we have benefited so much by aligning our design justice framework at the University of Washington, Tacoma with this framework of trauma, equity, resilience. And so just a few words here on human-centered design. The starting point is with empathy. We spend time understanding and centering the voices of those closest to the problem. And I heard that come through so many times throughout the day from our panelists. Juanita in particular talked about voice as most powerful. Sabrina talked about, you name it and then you fund it. And then of course we had Garrett, Mr. Garrett talking about relationship-based networking and organizations that can move the voices and the experiences of those closest to the problem to pathways to resilience. So we begin with empathy. We spend some time defining what the issues are. We ideate, we come up with ideas. And when I say we, it is with co-designing with those who are experiencing the issues. This is not a top-down, externally imposed solution that much of our systems do that perpetuate systems of inequity and systemic racism. We prototype, which means we create very tangible, low resolution models of what the solution might look like. It could be a process innovation, it could be a product innovation, but we want to build something that somebody else can take on and say, oh yeah, I think that would work, or here's how it might not work. And then we test it and it's an iterative process and we keep moving to refine it. And so the methods that we have used so far to get us to this point is, if we follow the numbers, we began with surveys of health and human services with United Way of Pierce County, and then moved from that, from an understanding of what the bottlenecks or barriers, both those experiencing the issues as well as service providers were facing, because as Dr. Ellis pointed out many times, these are interconnected systems. We need a multi-sector response, we need multi-dimensional impact. And so we were looking at the experience from multiple levels. And from this, we moved on to very qualitative piece with the focus group interviews and individual interviews, from which we developed some personas for resilient Pierce County group to have 2 design thinking workshops to ideate and prototype solutions. From that further work, we developed the personas and the empathy stories, bringing together user and provider experience that you received in your packet today, whether you're a facilitator or participant. There were 8 empathy stories that put side by side the user experience, the provider experience, and we brought, because the whole part, an important part of the design justice framework is to recognize the wisdom and the experience that has already gone before. There's a section in your worksheets that brings together the innovations suggested by by both user and provider, by both the community, the Ellis families, as well as the providers. So then what are we doing today? This red check mark, we're prototyping today. So in your groups, as you get into your groups, you will discuss the innovations that are already on your worksheets. You might want to prototype the best one there. So you'll have a discussion, you'll vote on the best one, and then you will prototype either as a group or individually. Your facilitator will help you through that. Or you might, as a group, think about something that's a little different, that's brand new, and you're welcome to prototype that as well. The goal today is to get as many ideas to action, as many prototypes as possible, so that we can all have scalable solutions moving forward. From this prototyping, we will create a big photo gallery. And from that, we're hoping that this work continues for the months to come, where there's an opportunity for further ideation and iteration and testing. So this is a large community here, 130 participants. And if those of you attended Poverty to Possibilities last year, you will know what an inspiring and electrifying experience it was. And we just felt so privileged and honored and blessed to be part of that energy in that room. So here we go, just a little bit of the background work, which showed that the communities and service providers actually had very similar experiences with the barriers that they were facing, and quite similar sources that they were receiving assistance from. So top barriers here were employment, affordable housing, childcare, for community service providers, access to technology, financial assistance, community connectivity, and so on. In the interest of time, I want to say if you have any questions, just email us at globalid@uw.edu. The email is all over your worksheets. And then from this broader survey, this is what we did with, we used the approach of the Building Community Resilience framework, as well as the pair of ACEs. We listened, we talked to people, we posed questions, asking them to share their experience. We asked about their connections with community organizations. And then, as Dr. Ellis reminds us so poignantly, the approach is what's in your soil? What can we do to disrupt these inequities for better outcomes? And so from those focus groups and individual interviews, as you can imagine, we created a word cloud here. There's a feeling of suffering, kind of an enduring. When is this going to end? I'm blessed, but I'm struggling. I'm concerned for community. I'm struggling. The word came up over and over. And most families, regardless of ethnicity, actually talked about family and friends as being the most that they connect to. And then we had neighborhood groups, and then we saw some variations based on ethnic groups on where exactly they move for community resources. And of course, the resilient framework talks about the importance of connecting to community, to community organizations for resilience. And so we created these personas. That's what's in your booklets today. And so just as a recap, our pre-work included talking to Ellis families, surveying Ellis families and service providers. We worked with Resilient Pierce County to further refine these ideas and prototypes. And here we are today in the solution space. We're prototyping, and we'll do, there'll be opportunity for a little bit of testing as we do our big group share. So this is where we are today, and I hope everybody is ready and excited to get moving. Design is really tactile. So folks, if you do not have already, we had asked for you to have simple prototyping materials ready with you. Ordinarily, if we were in a big group, we would be supplying you with all kinds of cool stuff, Play-Doh, pipe cleaners, crayons, markers, sheets. So in 30 seconds, if you don't have it already, dash around manically your offices, your bedrooms, your basements, wherever you're located, and just bring in some simple materials. Even if it's a matter of using paper and pen to do a 2D drawing, that's absolutely fine. As visual as possible. That's what we're going for. So gather your materials, get ready for your workshops, and a few pointers as you get into your small groups. Collaboration is best when you're fully engaged. So ask questions, talk things through, but spend time creating stuff. Move away from the tendency to need to talk. Action is what we're looking for. All ideas are welcome. Please remember to mute if you have background noise. Keep your camera on if you can, please. And then your facilitator, every room will have a facilitator, so please feel free to ask questions. And we're really looking forward to a dynamic, openly communicative, and involved process. All right, so here we go. You're going to get into breakout rooms. You will review stories. You will discuss ideas or invent the new ones. You pick a best idea, prototype the best idea. Try and be as 3D as possible. Be visual, be 3D. And then we'll come back as a big group at 11:30. So you just have about 20 minutes for all of this. Our time is short. And you will share your group's top prototype. Initially, we had a larger amount of time available, but this is all we've got for now. And we do want to have enough time for big group share. So facilitators, please note, we have a truncated time now for prototyping. And then you email your picture to Global ID or upload to a Google form. All right, so here we go. And just remember that as Dr. Ellis said, systemic inequities that have endured need solutions that endure. And we're so grateful to you. Thank you for your compassion, your creativity, your collaboration in designing these equitable and enduring solutions. So here we go to your breakout rooms. And thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you back here at 11:30. Welcome back, everyone. This is a very exciting part of the workshop where we hear from you and you share all your great ideas and your prototypes. And we know that facilitators have been working with the groups, and we just want to thank them again for their hard work in facilitating this creation and ideation of prototypes. And so we'll just open it up for a big group share. We're hoping to do this for at least 10 to 15 minutes. So please go right ahead. And we do have a list of facilitators as well. So just in case there's a little lull, we will be calling out names. And so here we are, we open the floor, and please go for it. Unmute, start speaking, and you will be spotlighted so everybody can see you. Share your prototype, hold it up to the camera, or just hold it up over here somewhere mid-camera so everybody can see it, and have at it. So thank you, everybody, and please go right ahead. Who would like to start?
I'll go ahead and start.
Thank you.
Does anybody mind if I screen share? Is that acceptable? Cool. So my group was group 1. There we go. And we had the problem of food bank accessibility. And we wanted to find a way that streamlined the application, made a universal application, and cut out the transportation problems that a lot of food banks have. And so we came up with a Uber Eats type delivery app, because a lot of us have seen since COVID started, food trucks coming into parking lots and handing out food bank essential items like that. And so we came up with this brilliant app where you would pick your box based on what the food banks had to offer, and it would be delivered to your house. And so this is our cute little app picture that Mary very nicely drew.
Tremendous. Thanks so much, Robin, and a huge round of applause for your group. That's wonderful. Another group, please.
So I want to follow Robin, because we had the same situation, but we went deeper. We saw and access to food banks as a symptom of a much larger problem, and so we focused on how do we help and you access some other resources that might help him in terms of employment and some other issues where, you know, rather than the food bank, but also ways to, if, you know, given the fact that food banks were an immediate need, that things that gave us some other options beyond just having to go to a food bank, like food vouchers, the things that gave him options to go places that were convenient for him to grab food, where he wasn't at the mercy of the availability of the food bank hours. And I wish I had the pictures, but my teammates sent the pictures to the Global ID website, so it's there.
Fantastic. And I'm hearing from Chrissy that there are a lot of ideas and pictures coming through. So that's very, very exciting, folks. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Casey. Let's go move on to another group.
I'll go.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. We just had 2 people in our group, and we kind of went a little off the rails, but we talked a lot about housing. We started off with story number 1, the young gentleman that just graduated from college, and ended up incorporating story 7 into it as well. The senior gentleman who has transportation needs and is looking for resources in his family that didn't live so close. This is, I don't know if you can see this. So this was actually an idea that came out of last year as well. If you can't read that, I will read it to you. Multi-generational affordable housing using apartment complexes near colleges. So for example, Spanish Hills near TCC. And you would dedicate half of the units to low-income seniors, the other half to low-income college students and new grads looking to just get launched and started on their life. And through that partnership, you'd have a lot of enriching experiences for the residents. You could partner with maybe a local healthcare system like the Multicare Health System. That's my agency, to maybe build a clinic. You've got a really well-established nursing program across the street to maybe get some experiences for nursing students and other allied health programs into the facility. You could have events, and I don't know, it just sounds like a lot of fun and a cool place to hang out. So,
that's terrific, Hope. And you're absolutely right. This idea was brought up last time as well. So it's obviously really an enduring idea that fills a huge need. And one of the things that came up last time as well was to build kind of complexes around where there were other resources as well, where it might be translation services, it could be food bank, and so on. So thinking of it as a community of resources right around the multi-generational housing. Thanks so much.
and access to transportation there too.
Absolutely, thank you. Go right ahead, next group.
Can I go yet?
Yes, please, go ahead, Penny.
Yeah, I want to see if I can possibly share my screen too. So we had a small group of 2 and we were looking at story 5, Ethan's story.
Yes.
And so the solution that we kind of came up with the issue of Ethan, who has autism and obviously remote learning, was to hopefully bring in other partners to collaboratively support Ethan in kind of a blend of supports and learning. So the picture shows Ethan surrounded by Ethan's point person, that would be at the mental health provider, Ethan's counselor, and then also a group of Ethan's friends or community folks, possibly other students, high school students, to form a small group that can tutor or have a small support group for Ethan from the neighborhood. This could be 5 people or less in social distance so that there would be some in-person socialization for Ethan. And then kneeling beside that neighborhood group is his classroom teacher, kneeling in support of Ethan and all of the other supports that are coming in to help him through this remote learning time. So the idea is that the IEP should be able to be customized and changed through this process that Ethan is going through, and then the mental health provider meets weekly with Ethan, and they also meet with the neighborhood support group that's seeing Ethan in person, along with the classroom teacher, and they surround him with support that way.
Thanks so much, Penny. Such a holistic design. Exciting to think of how this might be executed at a local and then slowly scaled up level. Anybody else with a similar example or who wants to jump right in?
Vivian, this is Georgia.
Go ahead, Georgia.
Great. So we had the same scenario as Penny, and sounds like we had a very similar discussion. Let's see.
Yes.
I can't get it. Wait, let me get rid of my background. Nope.
Right
Okay,
there.
there it is. Anyhow, it's really wraparound support for Ethan. It's building a social connection opportunity. It's creating consistency and structure for the participants. It involves the providers. It involves support for the parents, and then for each of the kids to create the environment that will help him be successful in the current difficult situation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Georgia. And your group, we'll go with Tracy, Shanice, and Claudine.
Thank you. And Bree, are you able to, I wonder how we might be able to show the design prototype, because we divided and conquered based on our skill sets. So
yeah, let me open my camera up and I will show you. Just let me flip to that page again.
Thank you.
We've got 5 more minutes for sharing, so thanks for moving along.
So this is story 6. It involves a high school junior who is feeling socially isolated, looking for opportunities to engage socially and also build her college resume. The social service agency looking to provide services is under-resourced from a technology standpoint and a staffing standpoint. The student sees herself as struggling with mental health. Our group concluded that she really is struggling with social isolation, and that what would be most useful in terms of a solution is helping get the community center back open on a limited basis, and having Kira, the student, design and lead a class for other young people who were looking for opportunities, that just participating in an activity somewhere wasn't quite as resume boosting for her college apps as it would be to design and lead her own core activity. We ran into successfully overcoming some of the barriers that were presented. Of course, we don't exactly know why the community center is closed and how we might overcome that particular barrier, but we are very confident, right, Joyce, that we can do it. So I think that's about that. Bree did a beautiful drawing of
Terrific. Yeah, that's an outstanding graphic visual depiction. Thanks so much, Tracy and Bree and group. Let's move over to Shanice and Claudine. And I'm seeing so many names pop up, and Missy and Dana.
So my group, we had story number 4, which was about the Miller family. She was a single mother trying to navigate Medicaid, neighborhood safety, and then she was super concerned about funneling children out of the streets. So my group came up with, I don't know if you guys can see it, but we came up with a pea patch / community garden / community playground. So in this community playground, there will be like a bookshelf that will help provide resources to the mother, possibly resources about Medicaid applications, et cetera, et cetera. The community garden will help the children stay out of the street, build social relationships in their communities, which will also enhance neighborhood safety. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Shanice. How about Claudine and Missy and Dana? Shall we go to Missy?
Hi, I'm here.
Okay. Hi, Claudine. Go ahead.
Hi. We had story number 7. It was about Frank, who needed some support at home. Doesn't get around very much and needs people to drop off groceries. Recently got a smartphone, doesn't quite know how to use it. So my thought process there was, my daughter created this awesome little figure for me. So we assessed the need that Frank needed to get support that way. And one of the things that I thought about was getting a core of volunteers together, whether they were students, oh geez, of course the phone for you, whether they were students or HOA members, PTA members, basically doing door to door or just leaving little notes to the neighborhood to see what the needs were. And then those individuals would then volunteer to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go over there and teach Frank through his door, if he's worried about having that contact, how to use his phone. And then while I'm there talking to Frank about his phone, what I can also do is then see whether or not Frank has other needs that aren't being met, whether by verbally asking or looking at visual cues while we're talking to Frank. Part of that though is also understanding the sensitivity and layers of what Frank may be going through, and viewing him through empathetic lenses. For example, how patient are we while we're teaching Frank? And so we have to make sure that the right group of people are able to help him out there. Also, then we would think about maybe onboarding a relatable partner. And I say a relatable partner in maybe there is a person who is Frank's age or close to Frank's age who has learned how to navigate the use of the technology and is willing to volunteer to help Frank. And maybe they come with and do this through the door communication to avoid the COVID contact and different things, especially during the time of the pandemic. Onboarding the relatable person and then saying, hey, Frank, now that you've learned how to use this, would you be able to volunteer to also pay it forward and help others? And then we just keep that cycle going as far as, hey, we're building the core, but now we're also helping Frank make community connections with people in his demographic that can relate to him, and they can learn together, or they have knowledge of resources that we may not tap into that they can share with Frank. And then you just keep going on that cycle, whether it's walking door to door. And I thought about it after the fact that this also helps people get out and get exercise if they are doing the walking around door to door and checking on folks.
Right. Thank you so much. That was incredible, Claudine. We are at 11:56. I would love to have just a couple more, if we can just do Missy and Jay really quick, and then I would like to hand it over to Donna to wrap up. We're committed to kind of stopping at noon. We know your time is precious, and we know that this work will continue far beyond this workshop. And so that's why we are collecting as many prototypes as possible, and we'll keep you posted on where this work is going and how we're building momentum. So please go ahead, Missy, Jay, and then I'll turn it over to Donna.
Sure. Thank you so much, Divya, and I will try to be quick. So our story was about the Miller family with this single mom and a child with epilepsy. And so we really focused on the mental and physical health of the family and of the student. So our idea was to create a network around the student and the family with a trusted liaison and advocate for the family. And this person would possibly be with the school district itself, with the understanding that the trust is with the school and with the school district for that family. And I tried to show the arrows because this is really about a network. It's not linear, of making sure that the family and the student is being taken care of, whether it's through the school and the school district, nonprofit network that provides services that the family can benefit from, insurance providers since the family isn't on Medicaid and doesn't have access to insurance, the health department to make sure that the student is adequately taken care of during the school day, as well as a community center that has wraparound services such as the Eastside Community Center model, where the nonprofits are in the community center and are available to the family and the student as well.
Thanks so much.
And that was with Carol Mitchell and Sherry Bevington as input.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Missy. Go ahead, Jay.
And I would like to say that Ida did a wonderful job facilitating, and she has other drawing that we'll be putting together. But basically, we had Andy, and what we realized, and this is a perfect way to perhaps end today, is that United Way of Pierce County and the Centers for Strong Families with Sound Outreach, Brian and company, they have helped about 150 families just like Andy, Alice families, work their way out of poverty and into much better situations financially and through employment. And so the drawing basically is to connect them with the Centers for Strong Families, and also help them realize what the available resources, Andy, are for food and transportation. And in doing so, we feel very confident that soon he will be saving and preparing and continuing on with employment and income and stability. So a shout out to United Way of Pierce County, and a shout out to Sound Outreach, and a shout out to the Centers for Strong Families for this is not just in theory, this is what they've actually done in Bethel School District. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jay. That was wonderful, and just represents such a multidimensional, interconnected approach that Dr. Ellis was talking about. I just want to thank everyone for your commitment, for your compassion, and your collaboration in bringing out these great ideas and prototypes. This is hefty work, and we will absolutely continue to move it to action. These are not just sitting in our space that just to talk about. I want to thank Donna and United Way team and Resilient Pierce County as well, and of course Chrissy and Lan for putting all of this together. And it's really been a privilege to work with you all. So thank you from the Global Innovation and Design Lab, and over to Donna to wrap this event up. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Divya. Wow, what an exciting morning! And it is exactly 12 noon. So I just want to thank everyone for showing up. And before you all get off, I wanted to could we just do a screenshot? You can take me off of this part and just where we could do a screenshot of everyone. That would be wonderful. Great. Take a couple of videos. Oh. Okay. All right. Did anyone get a picture of that on my team?
Missy did. Okay,
perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you for indulging me. At one point, there were just over 200 of you that participated. So again, thank you for showing up and being present today. And thanks again to our sponsors and our speakers and panelists. Divya, you and your team, thank you so much. There were wonderful facilitators that helped today as well. I want to thank my United Way team. This was new for us, doing a virtual event. And so even with a few snags here and there, I think the information that we're walking away with hopefully will get us energized and motivated to continue the work that we all do every day in the community. When I think back at a couple of things that I'll leave you with, we can't have resilient, as Dr. Ellis said, we can't have resilient individuals if they aren't in a community that supports resilience. And I am of the belief that we're in a community that has that public will to do so. It has the public will to do so. So I think Dr. Ellis said this as well, disrupt what needs to be disrupted. So I leave you all with that, that go out there and disrupt, reimagine how we can do things better as a community, so that more families will move from poverty to possibility. So thank you again. We'll be sending out a survey. We want to hear from you. We look forward to next year, and my hope is that we will be in person, but if not, we'll see you virtually next year. And if you want to get involved in the work that we're doing, when you fill out the survey, please provide your name and your organization and email. So again, thank you. Oh, I did do all of the gift cards. So I put your names, I sent you a private message. If you want a gift card, you received a private message from me, and we will email you the information for the gift card. It'll be a $25 Amazon gift card. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
It don't matter what the preacher gonna pray. up in the morning